Ever get the feeling that some places hold on to stories even after everyone's gone?
Yeah, almost like a stillness that speaks volumes, if you know how to listen.
Well, that's kind of what we're looking at today with global ghost towns. From forgotten mining camps to deserted villages, each one is like a snapshot of a moment in time, frozen. But why were they left behind? What were the lives of the people who called these places home, and what tales still echo through their empty streets?
It's really fascinating how many ghost towns exist around the world. You've got your classic gold rush towns in the USA.
Right, and Australia too, from what I've read.
Exactly. And then there's the abandoned settlements in Europe, even tucked away corners of London, believe it or not. They all have these captivating stories just waiting to be uncovered. So today, let's dive into these deserted places and try to unravel some of their mysteries, shall we?
Sounds good to me. So let's start with those gold rush towns. Like you mentioned, we see a lot of them in the American West and Canada. What's the story there?
Well, it's really a story of boom and bust, isn't it? Imagine a whisper of gold is discovered, and suddenly you've got thousands of people rushing in, hoping to strike it rich.
Right, almost overnight, you've got these towns popping up with saloons, hotels, the whole shebang.
Exactly. But then, just as quickly, the gold dries up or it becomes too difficult to extract. And just like that, people pack up and move on, leaving behind these ghost towns as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of fortune.
One of the sources mentioned that almost half of the mining towns established in the late 19th century were deserted within a generation. That's just incredible.
It really is. It makes you think about how precarious life was for those early settlers.
Speaking of precarious, you mentioned Australia too. What was the situation there?
Similar story, actually. A lot of boom and bust cycles. But in Australia, it wasn't just gold. They had towns built around other resources, too, like opal mining, for example.
Opal mining, interesting. Didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. There were a couple of towns that sprung up solely because of opal discoveries. But like the gold rush towns, when the opal ran out or the market changed, poof, the town was gone.
It just goes to show how closely tied those communities were to the resources they were built on.
And not just in Australia. We see this same vulnerability in Canada, too. Some towns were completely dependent on a single industry, whether it's fishing, forestry, or even something like whaling. When that industry declined, the town went with it.
It makes you wonder what happened to the people who lived there. Did they find new opportunities elsewhere, or were they left struggling?
Well, that's part of the mystery, isn't it? Some people probably moved on to the next boomtown, hoping for a better future. But for others, it must have been incredibly difficult to start over.
So we've got the gold rush towns in the USA, Canada, and Australia, all tied to these boom and bust cycles. But Europe seems a little different. From what I've read, European ghost towns seem to be shaped by more historical events.
Yeah, you're right. There are certainly some parallels. But you see a lot of European ghost towns that were abandoned due to wars or famine, or even just changing economic landscape.
Like that village in France, I think it was, that was destroyed during World War II and never rebuilt.
Right, or those once thriving port towns that lost their significance when trade routes shifted. They simply couldn't adapt to the changing times.
It's almost like these events leave scars on the land long after the people are gone.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even those bustling places can be vulnerable to the tides of history.
So we've got the ghost towns in the middle of nowhere, but then you brought up London. How do you have ghost towns in a city that's so alive and vibrant?
Well, it's not about entire towns being abandoned. It's more about these little pockets of the past that still exist within the city. Think disused tube stations or forgotten industrial
Oh,
areas.
right. Like that article you shared about the abandoned power station that's now being turned into a museum.
Exactly. These places are like hidden time capsules, offering a glimpse into London's past. And even though they're no longer in use, they still have a story to tell.
It's like a different kind of haunting, isn't it? Not by ghosts, but by the echoes of what used to be.
Yeah, I like that. A haunting by history. It makes you wonder what these silent places might tell us about our own time and the legacy we're leaving behind.
So for our listeners out there, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Why should they care about these ghost towns scattered across the globe?
Well, I think it's about more than just morbid curiosity. These places offer a tangible connection to the past, a way to understand how people lived, worked, and interacted with their environment. And they remind us that nothing is permanent. The world is constantly changing, and even the most thriving communities can fade away.
It makes you really appreciate the present moment, doesn't it? And encourages you to think about the impact we're having on the planet and the kind of legacy we're building for future generations.
Absolutely. So next time you come across a photo of a ghost town, or maybe even have the chance to visit one, take a moment to really look around and listen. You might be surprised by what you discover.
And maybe, just maybe, those silent stories will inspire us to create a future where fewer places end up abandoned and forgotten.
Now, wouldn't that be something? To learn from the ghosts of the past and build a future where everyone can thrive? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.